The Man in the Raincoat. When I look back on that night, it's not because it was especially strange at first. I was 21, living with my parents during a summer break before I moved out for work. They had left for the weekend to visit family, leaving me alone in the house for the first time in a while. I was used to it. I liked the quiet, the control over the TV, and not having to share the bathroom. So when the storm rolled in, I wasn't nervous, just kind of settled in, ready for a weekend of doing whatever I wanted. It was mid-afternoon when the sky started turning dark and thick clouds gathered fast. The weather app predicted a severe thunderstorm, high winds, heavy rain, even some hail. I remember watching the clouds gather, the light changing like it was dusk, even though it was barely past 3. I had the TV on, but mostly I was just scrolling through my phone, moving from app to app, half distracted. At some point, the wind picked up. It howled around the house, rattling the windows. The first clap of thunder was so loud I jumped. Then came the rain, so fierce it sounded like someone was beating on the roof with sticks. It wasn't the kind of storm I'd experienced often, where the whole power grid dies and everything goes dark. Here, the electricity stayed on, but the flicker of lights told me it was unstable. Nothing seemed out of place. The dogs in the neighborhood had started barking early in the storm, but had mostly quieted down once the heavier rain started. I remember thinking it was almost peaceful in a strange way. Just me, the storm, and the occasional distant rumble. Then I heard it. A soft tapping at the front window. I froze, listening. It sounded like fingers lightly drumming, but slow and deliberate. It wasn't the rain and wind. That was louder and more chaotic. This was something subtle, almost careful. The window where it happened was the one by the living room couch. I looked over my phone toward the glass, but I couldn't see more than the rain slashing across it. Nothing was there. The tapping stopped, and I chalked it up to a branch or something brushing the window in the wind. I got up, walked over to the curtains, and pulled them back just a bit to peek outside. The porch light flickered weakly through the sheets of rain, illuminating the wet concrete steps. No one. I thought that was the end of it, and went back to the couch. It was about 5 p.m. Then, as the storm hit full force again, I heard the tapping once more, this time on the front door. This time, I didn't try to dismiss it. I was getting a little unnerved. Rain poured down the glass panes of the door in long, angry streaks. Outside, the porch light gave just enough glow to make out a shape. I don't know why I was surprised when I saw a man standing there. He was wearing a yellow raincoat, the kind with the big hood and button snaps. It was soaked, dripping onto the porch. He was tapping his knuckles against the glass, not knocking, just this slow, steady tapping sound. Now I'd like to say I calmly asked who it was or if he needed help, but really I just sat frozen, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it over the storm. It wasn't that he looked threatening. His face was pale, sharp features, but his eyes were dark and a little blank. The kind of look that makes you feel like you're staring through a window into something you're not supposed to see. I whispered, "Hey, can I help you?" but my voice barely carried over the rain. The man said nothing, just kept tapping. I went to the door and locked it again, double-checking. I'm generally a trusting person, but at that moment, something in me told me not to open it. I edged back to the living room window and watched him through the storm. The man didn't move away. He just stood there, scratching the glass with his fingertips now, still silent. It was so odd, because the storm was fierce enough that no one else was out there. No other cars, no people, just us. But the light made it clear he was soaking wet, clearly had been outside for some time, and didn't seem to be moving toward shelter. I debated calling the police, but part of me thought maybe he was just lost, caught in the thunderstorm and needed to dry off. I even considered getting a towel or a blanket and tossing it out to him. But then the way he wouldn't say anything, wouldn't leave, something felt off. Suddenly, a huge crack of thunder shook the house, and the power flickered. For a moment, the porch was brightly lit by a flash of lightning, and I caught a glimpse of his face up close. Inches from the glass, his mouth was slightly open, but no words. His eyes caught the light and looked empty, something inhuman. And then the power died, plunging the house into darkness except for the storm outside. My phone screen was the only light I had. I texted my parents to tell them something was weird, but I was okay. Then I called 911 and explained the situation. The operator told me to stay inside, lock all doors, and wait for the police. Minutes passed, feeling like hours with the storm raging and my eyes fixed on the silhouette outside. The tapping stopped, but the figure didn't move. Occasionally lightning would illuminate him briefly, statuesque and silent. I didn't dare look away. Eventually I heard sirens on the street. Headlights from a police cruiser cut through the downpour. The porch light flickered back on as the power returned. A few officers emerged, flashlights in hand, and approached the door. I opened it carefully, heart racing. The man in the raincoat was gone. No footprints visible on the soaked concrete. The officers searched the surrounding area thoroughly, their flashlights cutting through the sheets of rain. After a long walk down the street, one officer radioed back that they had found him hiding near some bushes about 2 blocks away, soaked through and shivering. When they brought him back, I got a proper chance to look at the man in the raincoat again. It turned out he had a criminal record, break-ins, assault, and several charges related to stalking. No wonder the police took it seriously and arrested him on the spot. I was asked to come down to the station later and give a statement. Everything was recorded. The man refused to explain why he hadn't spoken to me or what he was doing at my door in the middle of the storm. No notes, no answers. They told me he had been seen in the neighborhood the past couple of days, lurking around other houses. But because everyone else was inside due to the weather, he managed to avoid attention. It took me days to shake the feeling that kept crawling under my skin. I kept picturing that blank stare pressed against the wet glass, watching me, waiting silently through the thunder. How the storm had covered his tracks, masked what was really going on. The strangest part is that the terrible weather, which usually makes you feel unsafe just because of nature's fury, was actually helping him stay hidden from everyone else. It was the perfect cover for someone like him. So yeah, I ended up safe. I'm lucky no one more awful came knocking that night. The storm passed and life went back to normal. But I'll never forget the man in the raincoat, standing silently in the rain, like a shadow the thunder brought with it. And I still wonder if the storm wasn't just bad weather, but a shield for things better left unseen. The car behind me. It was early September, just after 6 p.m., and I was driving to my parents' house. I was 22 at the time, living in a small apartment about 40 minutes away from them. That evening, a massive thunderstorm was rolling in. I'd gone to visit because my younger brother was leaving for college the next day, and I wanted to spend some time with him before he left. The sky was heavy and dark when I set out, the kind of sky that promises rain but hasn't unleashed it yet. I remember looking at the horizon, watching slow-moving clouds spool across the fading light. My route took me down a stretch of road I'd driven dozens of times before, mostly 2 lanes, winding through patchy woods and small hills, with a handful of houses here and there, but mostly rural. Not exactly a busy road, especially on a weekday evening. The radio was on low, playing some soft indie rock, nothing to really draw my attention, just background noise as I drove. About 15 minutes into the drive, the first raindrops started falling, lightly at first, then steadily, until the windshield wipers had to work faster to keep up. The thunder began to grumble in the distance, a low rumble that got closer with each mile. The road started to get slick, reflections sprawling out on the wet asphalt. I kept my speed cautious, especially since I was alone with my thoughts, just trying to get home safely. Around the halfway point, it was pouring hard. The storm was full on now. Heavy rain, lightning flashing sharp and bright through my windows, thunder booming loud and close enough to make me flinch. The kind of storm that slows everything down, you know? Like the world contracts, and all you can see is the small space lit up by your car's headlights. The houses disappeared, the woods pressed in closer. It was somewhere right around here that I first noticed the car behind me. Not immediately because the rain was coming down so hard, but in my rearview mirror, I caught the glint of another set of headlights. I tried not to think much of it. It's common to have other cars on the road, especially heading toward any town or highway junction. But what made me uneasy was that the car was pretty close and it was matching my speed exactly. When I glanced at the mirror again, its headlights hadn't flickered away or slowed down. They stayed right there, just behind me, steady. I was on a stretch of road that doesn't have any places to pull over easily, and the storm was making it impossible to see very far ahead. The rain poured down in sheets, and the thunderclaps sounded like they were bouncing from tree to tree. I tried to focus on my driving, blinking to clear the raindrops on my windshield, keeping my hands steady on the wheel, but my senses were heightened. That steady car behind me caught my full attention. I tried to tell myself it was probably someone just driving the same way, or maybe someone heading to the same neighborhood. After a few minutes, I passed the little convenience store where sometimes people pulled off when the weather turned. Normally, if someone was following me, they might have turned in there, but this car stayed behind me. The headlights kept pacing my brakes and acceleration. If I slowed, this car slowed. If I sped up a little, so did the car. At one point, I considered pulling off to let them pass, but the darkness and the rain made the side of the road look uneven and unsafe. Honestly, I started imagining the car speeding up and just cutting me off, but I pushed the thought away, telling myself it was silly to think about something like that. The mile markers passed slowly. I tried not to let my heartbeat get too loud. The storm was relentless, the constant pulse of rain hammering the roof of my car, the intermittent flashes that cast the woods in strange shadows. I remember tightening my grip on the steering wheel, sensing that I was more alert than normal. Then the car behind me blinked its high beams once, then twice. Not the casual tap most drivers use to flash a warning or a thanks, but slow, deliberate. That made my stomach tighten uncomfortably. I considered pulling over to let them get by, but there weren't any safe places to stop coming up, and the woods crept so close to the road at that point, it felt like stopping there would leave me completely exposed. I tried calling my mom's number, just to hear a familiar voice and calm myself, but the call wouldn't go through. No service. Fantastic. The storm must have knocked out some cell towers, something I should have expected given the weather. So I kept driving, heart pounding, the rear view mirror revealing the glow of those headlights like a shadow that wouldn't relent. After maybe 5 more minutes, I came up to a small intersection where the road I was on met the main highway. The highway was busier, better lit in some parts, with multiple lanes. I thought that if I could just get onto that road, the person behind me might pass, or at least I'd be surrounded by more cars. So I slowed down as I approached the stop sign, checking the mirror again. The car was still there, maybe a little too close for comfort. My mind raced. Was this someone just lost or someone watching me? The storm muffled everything except the steady windshield rhythm and my own breathing. I decided I wasn't going to stop. Instead, I ran the stop sign carefully, keeping an eye out for any angry drivers, then accelerated to merge onto the highway. Instantly, I spotted more cars, headlights appearing and disappearing through the rain. My relief was immediate, but short-lived. The same car stayed behind me, now wedged between 2 lanes, matching speeds as effortlessly as before. That's when I realized the car behind me wasn't just following, it was intentionally matching every move I made. My chest was tight. I didn't want to make sudden movements, in case the person was watching for that. I signaled to change lanes cautiously, hoping they might move around me, but the car shifted lanes too, still right behind me. Trying to keep calm, I thought about just driving straight to my parents' place, which was only about 10 minutes farther on that road. Lights from the town started to appear in the distance, the stores, the street lights, the houses. I told myself that if I made it there, I'd be safe. Then, as I approached the next exit ramp for the neighborhood my parents lived in, my phone finally got a signal again. I quickly dialed 911 as I slowed down to take the exit, keeping my eyes on the car behind me. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. I'm being followed. There's a car behind me. It's been driving close behind me for the last 20 minutes. I'm on exit 18 off Highway 9, heading toward Fairview Woods neighborhood. It's storming really bad, and I'm scared. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were en route. I pulled into the neighborhood slowly, figuring that if the person wanted to do something, it'd be more likely out here, where the streets were narrower and fewer people were around. But then, as I made the right turn into the block where my parents lived, the car behind me turned off the highway exit too, following exactly where I led it. Stay on the line, ma'am, the operator said calmly. The street was darker here, with fewer lights, but my house was recognizable. I moved past the driveway and slowed to turn into the second house down, hoping the headlights behind me wouldn't notice. That's when the car blinked its high beams again. My heart jumped. I slammed the car into park, grabbed my keys, and raced inside, locking every door behind me. I kept the phone to my ear. The operator kept me talking until I heard the sirens approaching through the rain. The flashing blue and red lights cast strange shadows across the rooms. I watched out the window as the squad car pulled up behind the car following me. 2 officers jumped out and moved swiftly toward the car, shining flashlights on the windshield. After a few tense moments, they motioned for the driver to step out. I didn't see the driver at first, but then a man in his mid-40s shuffled out, soaked from the rain and squinting in the light. An officer read him his rights, and he was handcuffed. Later, the police told me that they recognized the man's car. He had been reported for stalking in the area just days earlier. Apparently, he had a history of following women late at night, and the storm provided him cover. The officers thanked me for calling them immediately, and said without my quick thinking, the outcome could have been much worse. That night, even after the storm passed, I stayed at my parents', rather than heading back to my apartment. The rain kept tapping on the windows, and every now and then I'd glance at the dark road outside, a fresh wave of unease settling over me. But what hit me hardest was how vulnerable I'd felt on that stretch of road. The way the storm seemed to erase all the usual markers of safety. The endless rain and flashing lightning had created a bubble where I was utterly alone, with only a car behind me and no one to help. It made me realize how easy it is for someone to prey on that vulnerability when the world gets washed away by a thunderstorm, and how the smallest decisions, like whether to pull over or keep going, can suddenly become matters of survival. I've driven that route many times since, but I never forget that night and the car behind me that never left. The stranger at the motel. After I graduated college last spring, I decided to take a solo road trip to clear my head before starting work. I figured I'd drive from Ohio down to Tennessee, where one of my old friends from school lived. We'd hang out for the weekend, then I'd make the drive back. The plan was simple, about 7 hours on the road through a patchy stretch of countryside. But that trip didn't go as smoothly as I expected. I left early one Friday morning with my bags packed and my phone loaded with playlists and podcasts. The first few hours were uneventful, the usual flat farmland and clusters of trees slipping past. Then around midday, I noticed the sky darkening. A severe thunderstorm warning popped up on my phone, heavy rains and strong winds moving in fast from the west. At first I wasn't worried. I'd driven through storms before, but the closer I got to the state line, the worse the storm became. Gusts picked up, the rain hammered the windshield in an almost constant roar, and lightning zipped across the sky at alarming speed. I slowed down, careful on the slick roads, but traffic also got heavier. Some drivers were pulling off onto the shoulder, others seemed to speed through recklessly, like they wanted to beat the storm rather than respect it. By mid-afternoon, the storm was fully overhead, and I was somewhere along a stretch of road that felt farther from civilization than I realized. I'd been driving for nearly 6 hours, and my phone's battery was sitting low with sketchy service. I wanted to call my friend and let them know I'd be late, but the signal was too spotty. Then, just as a particularly bright flash of lightning lit the sky, my headlights caught sight of a small billboard advertising a motel a couple of exits up. The letters were faded, but it was a way to get off the highway, find cover, maybe even grab a bit of rest before continuing. I pulled off the next exit, my windshield wipers blasting away the rain, and followed the dark road to what looked like a small motel nestled against a line of trees. The place was quiet, way quieter than I expected. There were maybe 3 or 4 cars in the gravel parking lot, most of them older models and covered in dirt. The motel itself looked tired, paint peeling here and there, the neon sign flickering unevenly. The office door was just to the right of the parking lot, with a dim porch light swinging in the wind. I made my way inside, dripping rain on the linoleum floor. The clerk was an older man, probably in his 60s, with thin gray hair and a tired but friendly expression. He looked up as I came in and gave me a nod. "Evening," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "Hi," I said, taking off my damp jacket. He glanced at a ledger on the counter, and then said, "Yeah, I've got one. Just the one left. Room 6. It's near the back." He fished out an old-fashioned key from a box behind the counter and slid it across. $35 a night. I handed over a credit card and pulled out some cash just in case the machines went down, which wasn't unlikely given the storm. "Thanks," I said. "Is the Wi-Fi decent here?" He shook his head slowly. Not really, spotty at best. Most of our guests don't spend much time online anyway. I didn't press him, just nodded and took the key. I'll head to room 6. The hallway was dimly lit, the carpet threadbare and damp smelling. The door to room 6 was at the end, next to a window rattling in the gusts outside. I unlocked the door, flicked on the light, and stepped in. The room was basic. 2 twin beds pushed together with mismatched sheets, a small TV mounted on the wall, a dresser with a few drawers, and a tiny bathroom the size of a closet. There was a faint smell of mildew, mixed with the mustiness of old carpets. Nothing too unusual for a roadside motel. I dropped my bags, turned on the TV, and kicked off my shoes. The rain was still pounding the roof, and low rumbles of thunder echoed through the walls. After a few minutes, I pulled out my phone and tried calling my friend again. Still no service. Around then, I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing downstairs. Curious, I peeked out the window that faced the parking lot. At first, I didn't see much beyond the rain-soaked lot, but then I noticed a figure moving near the far end. That wasn't one of the cars I'd seen earlier. The person looked tall and thin. They walked with a slow, deliberate pace. I blinked, and they were gone, just between the motel and the tree line. Maybe someone checking out the storm. Still, a little uneasy, I pulled the curtains closed and sat back down on the bed, reminding myself it was just a person, probably one of the other guests. Time passed slowly. The storm seemed to settle into a steady rhythm, a relentless pounding of rain, occasional flashes of lightning followed by distant yet sharp rumbles of thunder. I tried to read a few pages of a book I'd brought along, but the atmosphere in the room was oddly oppressive. That's when it started, a faint tapping at my window. At first I thought it was just the rain or perhaps a branch hitting against the glass, but the tapping turned into a rhythmic sound, deliberate. I stood, walking over cautiously, and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek. Outside, in the slanting rain, the same tall figure stood facing me. They weren't holding an umbrella or flashlight. Their clothes were soaked, pressed flat against their body. But what unnerved me most was that their face was obscured, shadowed by the hood of a dark jacket. I froze. My heart quickened. The figure raised one hand slowly and tapped the window once again. "Hey," I called out, voice firmer than I felt. "Can I help you?" No response. Just the quiet thrumming of rain and the sound of that tapping again. I rubbed the glass slightly with my hand, hoping to make eye contact or figure out what they wanted. Nothing. Then I blinked, and the figure stepped back, vanishing into the darkness of the woods beyond. Gripping the curtain, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I sat back down away from the window and tried to convince myself it was nothing. A stranger seeking shelter, maybe lost and trying to get someone's attention, but not wanting to make noise or draw attention. Still, the uneasy feeling lingered, like something about the whole scene was off. I locked the window, double-checked the door, and tried to distract myself with the TV again. Static filled the screen between weak channels, and the thunder rolled closer and louder, shaking the thin walls. Hours passed like that, mostly silent except for the storm and occasional creaks from the weather-strained building. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Not hurried or panicked, but steady. Someone was walking around the edge of the motel, toward the back, pacing near the vacant rooms. I debated calling the front desk, but my phone still couldn't get a signal. I figured I could wait it out until morning. Then the power flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room, except for the brief lightning flashes, casting eerie shadows through the window. Panic flared for a moment, but I calmed myself. With the light in hand, I opened the door slightly and peeked into the empty hallway. It was empty and quiet. The footsteps outside stopped. I closed the door and locked it again. Then, from somewhere deeper in the building, a faint but distinct whisper came through the walls. I couldn't make out words at first, just a low murmur carried on the storm. I sat down, heart pounding, and waited. Eventually the whisper faded, replaced by only the storm's relentless rhythm. Morning came slowly. The storm eased into soft drizzle, and sunlight struggled through gray clouds. Relieved, I dressed and went downstairs to check out. The clerk was at the counter, sipping coffee, looking as tired as ever. I hesitated but mentioned the stranger outside last night. He gave me a sad, knowing look. "You're not the first to see him," he said quietly. "We get odd folks come through, especially when the storm hits hard. But that one, he's something else." I pressed him for details. He told me about a man matching the description who'd been seen in the area over the past week, knocking on doors and windows during storms, asking for help but never staying long enough to explain why. "The police caught him last night," the clerk said. "A neighbor found him hiding in the woods nearby. Turns out he'd been missing for years, suffering from severe mental illness and wandering in the storm." Relief washed over me, mixed with a strange chill. I thanked the clerk, paid my bill, and got on the road again. Driving away, I kept thinking about how completely different those isolated places feel during a storm. When the rain pounds down, the dark woods grow alive with shadows, and even a simple motel becomes a place where strange things seem more real. That night stuck with me, not because anything terrible happened, but because for a few hours, I glimpsed how thin the barrier is between safety and fear. How the storm can make the isolated feel utterly alone, and how strangers in the dark might be searching for help in ways we barely understand. I haven't forgotten the tapping on my window, and even now, on clear nights, I find myself watching the trees outside, wondering what others might be out there, lost and waiting for shelter in the storm. The house-sitting job. After my sophomore year of college wrapped up, I found myself with a whole summer stretching out ahead, and I didn't want to just loaf around campus or my apartment. My mom suggested I take a house-sitting job that one of her coworkers had offered. The woman, Mrs. Callahan, lived in a large 2-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. They were an older couple, and with summer trips planned, Mrs. Callahan needed someone reliable to stay at the house, keep things in order, and maybe water the plants or get the mail. Nothing fancy. I figured it was a good way to make some money and have a change of scenery. Mrs. Callahan and her husband were out of town for a few weeks, so I moved in with their permission, not expecting much beyond the usual quiet suburban life. The house was kind of imposing for just me, a big white colonial with dark shutters and a wraparound porch. It felt peaceful here during the day, neighbors waving as they jogged past, kids playing distant games, birds calling out from the trees. But as the sun dropped lower each evening, that calm started to feel a little different. The first week was uneventful. I kept busy cleaning, reading, and running errands around town. The backyard was generous, shaded by old oak trees, and I spent hours lounging there when the weather was nice. But about 10 days in, a storm rolled in one afternoon, thick and sudden. The sky darkened, the air grew heavy, and the kind of tension you feel before thunder hit rolled through the neighborhood. I remember sitting on the porch with my laptop, trying to finish a paper. The rain started as soft drops pattering on the wooden boards, then quickly turned into a steady downpour. The wind picked up, rattling the windows and stirring the branches overhead. The whole cul-de-sac grew eerily quiet, as if the storm sucked up every stray sound, except the howl of the wind and the sharp cracks of thunder. I was already planning to call it an early night, when the power flickered and then went out. The house sank into darkness, save for the flashes of lightning that lit up the rooms in stark white. I grabbed some candles and set them on the coffee table. The flickering shadows made the walls seem to breathe, usual stuff in a house this size. Then, near the back of the house, I thought I heard something else, just barely, over the storm's roar. At first, I convinced myself it was the wind, or maybe a branch scraping the siding. But no, the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It was a soft scraping noise, like something being dragged slowly across the ground right behind the house. I dropped my voice to a whisper as I told myself I was imagining things, but curiosity mixed with unease got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and tiptoed to the back door. With the storm whipping the rain against the glass, it was almost impossible to see anything in the backyard. I started towards the door when the lights flickered again. Then I noticed something odd. The garden gate, which I was sure I'd locked that morning, was slightly ajar. My heart rate picked up. I stepped out onto the porch with the flashlight, the wood slippery beneath my feet. I swung the gate cautiously open and peered into the darkened yard. Nothing but wet lawn and swaying branches. No sign of a person, no footprints in the mud. Still, the feeling that I wasn't alone didn't go away. I shut the gate firmly and bolted it this time. As I turned back towards the house, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow fleeing behind a tree. My breath caught. I locked the back door and closed the curtains tight, settling again on the couch, my hands tightly gripping the flashlight even though I didn't want to look outside. The storm grew louder, rain beating harder against the roof, thunder dragging out long grumbles that shook the windows. I wanted to tell myself it was over, that it was just a stray animal or the wind that pushed the gate open, but deep down, I doubted it. The rest of that night passed slowly. Every creak and groan of the old house sounded suspicious. The candles burned low, and I kept pacing the rooms, checking doors and windows. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me towards sleep, but I made sure to place a heavy chair against the back door before laying down on the couch. Morning provided some respite. The rain had stopped, clouds drifted away, and the sun peeked through. I stepped outside to look around the yard more carefully. That's when I saw it, a series of muddy footprints, starting just beyond the gate. They led around to the back window, then vanished at the side of the house. Whoever had been out there had gotten in through the garden gate and wandered around the backyard, possibly watching the house through the windows during the storm. I called Mrs. Callahan, telling her about the footprints and the open gate. She was concerned and said she'd alert the neighbors and ask them to keep an eye out. They suggested I contact the police as well, which I did. An officer came by that afternoon, took notes, and said they'd increase patrols in the area, given the recent rash of break-ins in some parts of town. Over the next few days, I was more vigilant. I double-locked every door and window. Still, I didn't want to let the fear control me. I needed this job, and I reminded myself that those footprints might mean nothing more than some curious local or a raccoon scratching around. But then, about a week later, I had the most unsettling experience yet. That night, the same kind of thunderstorm rolled in, dark clouds, heavy rain, flickering lightning. I was reading in the living room, trying to spread a calm layer over the growing tension I felt with each storm. The power stayed on this time, thankfully, but the atmosphere was thick. Suddenly, a sharp knock sounded at the front door. Startled, I paused. Who on earth would come knocking during a storm like this? I ignored it at first, waiting for the sound to stop. But the knocking grew more insistent, louder, heavier. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved cautiously to the peephole. All I could see was the driving rain. No face, no silhouette, just the bulbs of water sliding down the glass obscured my view. I didn't open. Instead, I locked the door and picked up my phone to call 911. Before I could finish dialing, the knocking stopped. Silence settled like a blanket. Then, out of nowhere, a loud thud sounded against the door, and the doorknob rattled violently. Someone was trying to force their way in. I remembered the chair I had dragged against the back door last week, but the front door was wide open. I backed away slowly, dialing 911, whispering into the phone about the intruder. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way. I sat down in the corner of the dining room, keeping my eyes on the front door, flashlight gripped in one hand, phone in the other. Minutes felt like hours. The storm raged outside, door rattling less as the winds shifted. Then headlights appeared on the street. 2 police cars headed right to the house. Officers rushed inside, commanding an unseen person to come out. They swept the house, guns drawn. The sense of danger lifted when they found a man crouched in one of the closets. He was soaking wet, disheveled, and mumbling to himself. The police said he'd been watching the house for days, sneaking into the backyard during storms, waiting for a chance to get inside. When the power went out last time, he'd tried to break in through the back door, but I'd locked it securely. This time, he attempted entry through the front door, knowing I was alone. The officers arrested him and assured me I was safe now. He was later identified as a local drifter with a history of trespassing and petty theft. The community felt shocked, but also relieved that the threat was finally contained. After that night, I stayed with Mrs. Callahan's house until her return, but I kept a stricter watch. I learned to trust my instincts, to treat unsettling feelings seriously, and to prepare for the worst even in the calmest places. The neighborhood felt quieter, but that stormy night changed how I saw it forever. Looking back, the strangest and most disturbing thing was how the thunderstorm transformed the whole scene. That same quiet cul-de-sac that felt so safe during sunny days became a place of isolation when the sky opened up. The rain and thunder washed away the usual signs of life, the neighbors, passing cars, distant laughter, and suddenly I was utterly alone with the shadows. Even surrounded by houses and streets, the storm made the world shrink down to just me and the unknown lurking nearby. It's an unsettling feeling, realizing how nature can turn a familiar place into a sprawling void where your usual safety nets just disappear. Since then, every time a thunderstorm rolls in, I'm reminded how even a place you know well can suddenly feel impossible to escape. Like the darkest weather shines a spotlight on whatever fears have been hiding quietly just beneath the surface.